If you could, in a sentence, just introduce Mary Nukem.
In a sentence.
In a sentence. We'll expand on that.
I was going to say, this is going to be a run-on sentence. Mary Nukem was a fabulous lady. She followed her husband during the Civil War down to Cairo, Illinois. He died in a battle from Fort Donelson, and she went back with the troops and became a nurse at Shiloh and at Vicksburg, and she was from right here. So it's pretty fascinating. She met Abraham Lincoln right on the steps of the Capitol building, and that's a really long run-on sentence. I'm Patty Winn. I'm a historic reenactor. I'm from Effingham, Illinois. I portray about 70 different women from history or from the Bible. I've been doing this a very long time, so when I put on the costume, I'm her. I'm okay with that. But the process is not just to snap your finger. It's a bunch of research, and people see the finished product. They don't see the countless hours and hours and hours of research I put into these people. Mary was very hard to research, just her life, because what we knew about her was in that one little book.
My name is Linda Ruholl. I'm a nurse historian here at the Old Courthouse Museum. Well, nursing in those days was not a profession. I mean, that should be established right away. It was not a profession. There was no profession of nursing in this country or anyplace else. In the process of completing my PhD at Walden University, I had several research methodology classes. And within those classes, I learned how to do qualitative research. So the development phase of the book took about 3 years. And I sort of let the data lead me. I didn't set out with a master plan. I went to see what I could find in archives, what I could find in the internet, what I could find in other things that were available locally here. One of the problems with this kind of research is that women don't leave very deep footprints in history unless they are related to or tied somehow or another to someone who is famous. And Mary Nukem definitely was not famous. It also took me pretty deep into parts of Civil War history, particularly those battles that occurred along the Western Front. So Fort Donelson, for example, I read several books about that, and my husband and I did a trip there so I could actually see what that battlefield was like and to walk on it with my own little feet rather than to trust someone else's description of it. Profession of nursing got started in Great Britain with Florence Nightingale. What Florence Nightingale figured out was that there were certain common elements that needed to be in place in order for a person to recover. Medicine didn't have much to offer. There just wasn't a whole lot there as far as surgery or of medications that would make a difference to the patient. So what the nurse had to do was create situations where the patient could heal himself. I think that Mary Nukem definitely read Nightingale. Hiram Schaus was a gentleman who was wounded at the Battle of Fort Donelson. Hiram Schaus had a couple of wounds in his arm, and the physicians there wanted to amputate that arm. Hiram Schaus, however, wanted to keep his arm. He wasn't convinced. And he was already showing some signs of infection at the time that Mary Nukem first encountered him. But Mary Nukem listened to him and said, "Well, I'll see what I can do to try to salvage your arm." When the doctors came back to see him a second time, they were impressed with the fact that the arm looked better, and undoubtedly they were expecting it to look worse. So they told her that, well, okay, they'd wait a little longer and see how it did. And so they came back another day and the arm was greatly improved, and Hiram Schaus got to keep his arm. Now the upshot of that was that after the Civil War was over, Hiram Schaus became an MD. He moved to another state and practiced for many years. He produced a large number of children. He was the sole practitioner in a small town, and all of that is a direct result of Mary Nukem being able to salvage his arm.
If we had a spectrum of 100 years, a timeline of 100 years, and you put Mary over here, Mary Nukem over here, and she's like a stepping stone I don't want to say that we want to walk on her, but she's a stepping stone as the progression that got the nurses to where they were. She didn't have to go where she went, but she went. And I think that's an example of a lot of the nurses who served during Vietnam, who some of them didn't have to leave the hospital area, but they did.
My name is Betty Bailey. I grew up on a farm south of Effingham near Mason, and that's where I live today, in the same house I grew up in. My fiance was in ROTC at the University of Illinois, and he would have a 2-year obligation to the Army after he graduated from university, and so all of those ROTC boys were going to Vietnam at that time. This was 1967. We talked about it, and I really did not want to spend the first year of my marriage alone and worrying about him being over there. And so since I was a nurse and they were recruiting for nurses to join the Army, we decided that I would just go with him if he had to go. We weren't always in the same place at the same time, but we were nearby.
For Mary Nukem, the battle would rage during the day, and then after the guns stopped firing, then they could go out on the field and pick up the men to bring them to be treated. So they might have laid in mud or blood or whatever all day. And with the Vietnam War, they have, just where they can get them off the field so quickly. What a change in that. And warfare. Warfare today is nothing like the mini balls.
Well, I think Mary Nukem what she has to say to us is that you as an individual can make a difference. Don't just sit there, get up and do something.
I think that we really gave good care in Vietnam, and I think I probably already said that, but I've always felt good about the year that I spent there because I felt like I made a difference, and all the nurses that were there, I think, felt that way. It was a good year. It was a year I'm really glad I did, but I certainly wouldn't want to do it again. It was a hard year.
It's interesting, when Mary Nukem, when the Civil War was over, she wasn't a nurse anymore. She was a millinery. She made hats, and she wrote a book, and but that was a defining moment in her life. Walt Disney said, you need to find your defining moment and then move on. And for Mary Nukem, her defining moment was to be a heroine to young men who needed a mom, needed someone to nurture them, needed a nurse. Betty Bailey served during Vietnam. The needs didn't change. Those young men still needed someone to nurture them, someone to take care of them and tell them they were valuable enough, that their life was valuable, and that they would do anything they needed to do to help save that life.